It's the honest truth. Even your father-in-law must have heard about your blunders, right? It's downright unbearable. Sharing a meal with a poor woman who grew up in a single-mother household like you? It's preposterous. You come from a different world than us. Please, just leave and wait outside.
Understood. I'll leave. I politely said goodbye to the Johnson family and tried to leave. My name is Mary Johnson. I'm a 24-year-old working at Johnson Enterprises. As the secretary to the CEO, I've been employed here for about 2 years. I was actually invited to join the company by the CEO, Ronald Johnson, while I was still in college. We were in the same business class and ended up becoming good friends because our seats were side by side. Ronald is 30 years old, and we met when he was 24. He had already graduated from a 4-year college, but he was attending college again to deepen his knowledge as a business owner, it seems. He is quite the scholar. His father is the chairman of the Johnson Group. During his university years, Ronald took over his father's will and served as the president of Johnson Group Trading. He became an elite at a young age by becoming a president. My family, on the other hand, was extremely poor. My father was a gambling addict and a hopeless casino fanatic. The debts he incurred led to my parents' divorce when I was in elementary school. My mother raised me single-handedly. I want to somehow help my mother who has been struggling. With that feeling, I kept working hard at my studies. And then, Ronald, who learned about my situation, invited me to join his company, Johnson Trading. 2 years have passed since I joined the company and started working as Ronald's secretary. I have acquired secretarial and business document skills certification, and I am working hard for Ronald. By the way, Ronald Johnson, the president, is also my husband. Originally, I was interested in him during my university years and started dating after joining Johnson Trading. After a year of dating, I got married to Ronald. Ronald is a kind husband who, despite being a president, never acts arrogant and always takes care of me. I feel extreme happiness being able to be with him both at work and at home. I truly believe it was great that I met Ronald. Then came a certain day. A transfer notice was announced at Johnson Trading, and I couldn't hide my surprise at the name. The appointment of a vice president. And that name was Julia Johnson. I inadvertently frowned at the sight of the new vice president's name. I couldn't believe that the person I was not comfortable with was becoming vice president. This Julia Johnson is the wife of Ronald's brother, Billy Johnson. The reason she was promoted to vice president is because she has a proven track record of reviving companies in the Johnson Group. The performance of Johnson Trading has been declining year by year. Originally dealing mainly in food and clothing, the recent epidemic has resulted in a decline in sales. Ronald was in a frenzy trying to recover the performance, but to no avail, hence the competent Julia Johnson was appointed as vice president. In other words, she is my sibling-in-law. Why am I uncomfortable with this person? The reason goes back 1 year. I first met Julia at the wedding reception when Ronald and I got married. She was a very beautiful and cute woman, but when I greeted her, she just said, I got a really bad impression. Did I do something? When I tried to start a conversation with Julia. Where are you from? Where am I from? I'm from Cincinnati. The moment she clicked her tongue. Do you not understand what I mean? I'm asking about your social status, not where you're from. Surely you're not just a commoner, are you? I couldn't make sense of my conversation with her, and all I could say was, I'm an ordinary citizen. Then she just disappeared without a word. I haven't seen Julia since then. The much-anticipated day of the internal personnel change, X Day, arrived. Julia was appointed as vice president, and Ronald and I went to the station to pick her up. I was nervous about seeing her again after a long time. I didn't know what to say, so all I could say was, "Julia, nice to meet you." She just said, "Oh, it's been a while." Got into the limousine arranged by Ronald and headed straight to Johnson Trading. When Ronald and I entered the president's office, I heard words from him that made me doubt my ears. He wanted me to be Julia's secretary. When I asked why me, he said it was because Julia had requested it. Apparently, Ronald couldn't refuse because she was his brother's wife. I reluctantly accepted when he pleaded with me. The job is the same as a president's secretary, managing the schedule, assisting with tasks, and answering the vice president's phone calls. However, since the person was my brother-in-law's wife and an unknown entity, I found it hard to do. Still, I had to do it. In the afternoon, I entered the vice president's office where Julia was. I greeted her and tried to start a conversation in the hope of getting along with her a little bit. "I'm so glad that you're the vice president, Julia. I look forward to working with you." I greeted with a smile, but she said, "I don't care about that, just tell me tomorrow's schedule." I was initially angry, but I held it in, apologized with, "I'm sorry," and explained it to her with my notebook. What's with this arrogant attitude? But she is a member of the Johnson family. I didn't want to cause a big trouble. And didn't want to cause trouble to Ronald, so I decided to do my job while holding back. That day, Ronald came home to the apartment when I got home. When I went to greet him at the entrance, he said, "What's wrong? You look pale." I just responded with, "I'm fine." I couldn't tell him after all. One day, I made a grave mistake. I accidentally swapped Ronald and Julia's schedules and only realized this when I received a phone call from Julia. She stated that she had not scheduled the meeting that I had told her about. Looking at the schedule, I saw that I had relayed the details of the meeting meant for Ronald to Julia instead. I realized my mistake. But it was too late by then. I was rebuked by Julia saying,
"I apologized to the client, but they didn't forgive me, and we lost a hard-won deal worth $200,000 because of you."
She also lamented about the fact that she had to put up with unwanted advances from the lecherous president of the company we were dealing with to secure the deal, all of which ended up being for naught due to my error. Upon hearing that Julia returned to the office, I immediately went to the president's office. I walked in and first thing, I apologized deeply. But Julia shouted back,
"Sorry isn't enough."
her face as red as a demon's. I was at a loss for words when Ronald stepped in. "This time, it's true that Mary is at fault. But there's nothing we can do about it now. Be careful next time." Ronald tried to mediate the situation, but Julia snidely remarked,
"She'll just make the same mistake again. This is why uneducated commoners are useless."
Upon hearing this comment, I recognized my fault but wondered what she meant by not having a decent education. It felt like my personality and life were being denied, which fueled my irritation. But the mistake was mine. Unable to retort, I stayed silent, then Ronald intervened.
"That might be an overstatement."
However, Julia turned away with a dismissive, "Humph." After getting permission from Ronald to leave, I exited the president's office. I went to the company cafe to reflect, pondering why I made the mistake. Just then, Julia walked in. I rushed to her, saying,
"Julia, I'm sincerely sorry for what happened."
I apologized without caring who was around.
"I'm forgiving you this time because the president asked me to. But don't think there will be a next time. I can fire a commoner like you any time."
This was the last straw. I understand and accept my mistake. But what does being a commoner have to do with anything?
Excuse me. Is being a commoner relevant here? What? Who are you to argue? If you had a proper education, you wouldn't have made such a mistake.
Well, I think my mistake and my home environment are unrelated. Is there something against commoners? I inadvertently confronted Julia. She sighed, as if exasperated, and said, "Never mind." Then she walked away. A week later, Ronald, Julia, and I were set to attend the head office's executive meeting. We had a pre-meeting lunch as the meeting was scheduled in the afternoon. After thoroughly checking the topics and materials, I felt well prepared this time. As our meeting neared conclusion and Ronald left for the restroom, I also went to the restroom at the time. I felt nervous about attending the meeting with Julia, fearing more criticisms. I felt a salty taste as I sipped the water in my glass, but dismissed it as my imagination and finished the drink to quench my thirst. We joined the executive meeting at 3 p.m. The meeting progressed smoothly, but suddenly, I felt an urge to use the restroom. The feeling was so strong that I could hear my stomach rumbling. There was no way I could hold it in. Yet, I didn't have the courage to interrupt this solemn meeting by declaring, "Excuse me, restroom," and rushing out. Regardless of my reluctance, the urge to go kept tormenting me. "Ronald, everyone, I'm sorry." Before facing the deluge, the disaster, the guerrilla rainstorm,
I'm sorry.
I rushed out of the meeting room and into the restroom, where I stayed for nearly 30 minutes. Everything was over, and I opened the door and stepped outside. I was feeling incredibly unwell from dehydration and exhaustion. It seemed that the meeting was over too, and Ronald and Julia were sitting in the company cafe. Ronald was looking at me with concern, but Julia had a smirk on her face. That's when a suspicion crossed my mind. The water I had drunk earlier had a strong salty taste. When I returned from the toilet and sat down clutching my stomach, Ronald asked me if I was okay. But Julia just said, "Did you eat something weird and get food poisoning?" in a sarcastically tone. Could it be that she mixed a laxative in while I was gone? But why? Would she do something like that? Out of anger for the lost deal? I don't know. But I did have diarrhea after drinking that water. I found myself plunged into doubt and suspicion. Ronald told me, "Go home and rest today." So I decided to go home. The diarrhea was better, but my stomach hurt. I laid my head on the cafe table until I calmed down. After a while, the pain subsided and I decided to head home. But before that, I had to inform the vice president of tomorrow's schedule. I headed to the vice president's office and knocked on the door. When I did, I heard Julia's voice saying, "Come in." When I entered the room, she said, "Oh, it's you." Of course, she didn't bother asking about my health. "What do you want?" "Make it quick, I'm busy." "Julia, you put something in the water, didn't you?" At my question, Julia smirked and said, "What are you talking about?"
Don't play dumb. At lunchtime, when Ronald and I left our seats, didn't you mix something in my glass? Oh my! What a sudden accusation! It's completely unreasonable to blame others. Get out of here, you fool!
Furthermore, I saw a box of laxatives on her desk. When Julia noticed my gaze, she said, "Well, I might as well tell you the truth. Yes, I mixed a drug into your glass."
Why would you do such a thing? What did I ever do to you? Why have you been like this since we met?
It's simple. Because you're a commoner, that's all. You're unnecessary to the Johnson family. Her flippant reason for considering me a commoner left me not just angry but dumbfounded. And tears welled up in my eyes.
Unfortunately, I'll have to fire you. No matter how much you tell the president about me, you have no evidence, so it's impossible. Plus, if you consult anyone, you'll be making an enemy of the Johnson family. A rift will form between my husband Billy and Ronald, and the brotherly relationship will become the worst because of you. If you're okay with that, feel free to consult.
She was right. If I told Ronald, the Johnson family would be in turmoil. I had no choice but to endure in silence. Tears of frustration wouldn't stop, and I navigated through the blurry vision to head home. Ronald worried about my sobbing figure. I wanted to talk, but if I did, things would get serious. Ronald asked, "What happened? Is it about Julia?" He hit the nail on the head. After much hesitation, I said, "Actually, Julia." I ended up talking about everything, the past events, and the incidents at today's meeting. Once I started speaking, I couldn't stop, and I ended up speaking my mind. And then, I couldn't stay in the Johnson family anymore. But it was because of me that a major deal fell through. I was just a drag. Ronald, I'm sorry. Let's get divorced. If I'm gone, you can stay good with Billy, with Julia. I'm an unnecessary person.
Don't despair. I'm no good without Mary. I love Mary. I want you by my side every moment. That's why I made you my secretary. So, please don't leave me. Don't talk about such sad things like breaking up.
One day at the end of the year, Ronald asked me to come to a dinner party where the entire Johnson family would gather. Of course, Julia would be there. I decided to go to the dinner party. After all, it was an important event. And then, I made up my mind and left the house. The staff greeted me and showed me the way. My in-laws, Billy and Julia, were already at the table. I greeted everyone. Of course, Julia acted sullenly with a humph. It was an expected attitude. When Ronald and I sat down, Julia first said, "I feel sick. I really feel sick. Having dinner with this poor trash, it pollutes the atmosphere. It will spoil caviar we are going to have." At this statement, my father-in-law said,
"What are you talking about?"
in anger.
"It's the truth. You must have heard about her gaffe, too, right? It's so annoying. It's not a joke to have dinner with a commoner from a single-mother household. You're from a different world. Just go out. It's better if you wait outside."
Understood, then. I said bye to everyone in the Johnson family and was about to leave. I heard my father-in-law suddenly yell,
"Then you should go home."
"What? What do you mean, father-in-law?"
No ifs or buts. You're the unnecessary one in the Johnson family.
"What are you talking about, father-in-law? I am the vice president of Johnson Corporation and Billy's wife."
She seemed to want to argue, but my father-in-law shook his head and said,
"It seems Billy wants to divorce you."
At that word, Julia glared at Billy.
"Billy, is that true?"
"Yes, I'm tired of your high-handed attitude that looks down on people and you don't do any housework. You're good at your job and there are parts one respect, but otherwise, you're done as a human being. You're the one who's in the way."
What?
Furthermore, it seems that my father-in-law had heard from Ronald about what Julia had done to me so far. The fact that Billy didn't like her, and about me, my father-in-law seemed to have planned to cut ties with Julia at this opportunity. That's what the dinner was for.
Don't say such ridiculous things. After all, father-in-law, do you have any proof? The proof that I made Mary sick.
At this time, I thought it was time for revenge. Everyone in the Johnson family is on my side. There's nothing to fear. I remembered on the spur of the moment and pulled out the pen I always stick in my chest. Then, Julia made a puzzled face and then laughed out loud.
What are you thinking, showing such a thing?
Her complacency will end now. Without any hesitation, I pressed the switch on the pen.
Don't play dumb. Didn't you mix something into my glass when Ronald and I left our seats during lunch?
When my voice played, Julia's face turned pale. Yes, this pen is not just a pen, it's a pen-type recorder. It's always recording to not forget the content of conversations at negotiations and meetings. Thinking that there might be something, I kept Julia's voice as evidence. And now was the perfect time to play it. Julia covered her face with both hands and was trembling. It's not over yet, Julia.
You didn't really marry Billy out of love.
You married him to expand the Lee Group's power, didn't you?
Well, what are you talking about?
Then, Ronald took out his smartphone and started playing a certain voice recording.
That poor woman is unnecessary to the Lee Group.
Instead, I will incorporate the Johnson Group into the Lee Group eventually. Suddenly, Julia covered her face and screamed.
Stop! I feel so embarrassed.
Was this her soliloquy?
In doing so, my status will rise even higher.
How secure. After that, a long conversation that seemed like Julia's monologue continued.
Once I become the next president of Johnson Corporation, I can frequent high-end male strip clubs even more than now.
And the recording also contained her calling out the names of her favorite stripper, saying,
I love you.
And
I adore you.
Hearing this, Billy showed his anger.
You're obsessed with strippers.
Why did she feel embarrassed after the voice recording was played? The Lee Group that Julia mentioned is a rival of the Johnson Group. She originally was the daughter of the Lee Group. However, it was said that she had a love marriage with Billy, but that seemed to be different. She might have been forced into a political marriage as a spy for the Lee Group.
You will divorce Billy and dismissed as the vice president. Furthermore, we will completely withdraw from the Lee Group. We've been getting along through mutual encouragement, but this is a total break.
Julia's face turned pale. Furthermore, the mother-in-law, who had been listening to the whole thing, opened her mouth.
Julia, you called Mary a poor person and a commoner. But what I can't forgive the most is that you denied that she was raised in a single-parent family. I too was poor and raised in a single-parent family when I was young. You don't know the human heart. You're the one who's not needed.
It was the first time I had seen the mother-in-law so angry. I was surprised, as she always gave me a gentle and smiling impression. Everyone's gaze gathered on Julia. She pounded the table with both hands and stood up vigorously.
Remember this. The Lee Group will never forgive you.
She spat out this parting shot and left the restaurant. Honestly, my heart felt very relieved. Everyone protected me. I no longer needed to leave the Johnson family. As I felt relieved, tears began to flow. Seeing this, Ronald and my parents-in-law and Billy all comforted me. 2 weeks after the dinner party, a call came from the chairman of the Lee Group. I remembered Julia's words.
The Lee Group will never forgive you.
However, the contents of the call were unexpected.
I sincerely apologize for the tremendous inconvenience my daughter, Julia, has caused you.
The chairman himself had made an apology call. Apparently, he had heard the detailed story from the chairman of the Johnson Group, my father-in-law, and when he asked Julia, she readily admitted to it.
The Lee Group does not think about crushing the Johnson Group at all. This trouble is my responsibility as a parent, I'm truly sorry.
It turned out that everything had started from Julia's delusion. Moreover, the reason why Julia mixed that thing for me seemed to be a grudge against my previous rebuttal.
Does being a commoner matter?
It seemed that she couldn't stand being told various things by me, a commoner, even though she was in the upper class. She is indeed a woman with high pride. Some time passed, and I received another invitation to a high-end restaurant from my in-laws. I went to the restaurant with Ronald. The place was the same restaurant as before. There, my in-laws were already present, and the four of us gathered around the table. My father-in-law tried to order. Then, two staff members came over, and I was surprised to see one of them. The staff member was none other than Julia.
Why are you guys here?
Why are you working here?
I have no choice. My father told me to gain experience in customer service and learn about society. Really? Even though I, a lady, have to do this?
She turned red in the face with anger, and the stern-looking male staff behind her said,
Hey! Don't keep the customers waiting. Take their orders.
Yes. I'm sorry.
She was almost in tears as she took the order. Honestly, it was very funny. The dish was delivered, and while we were enjoying its taste, we heard the male staff yelling again. When I looked in the direction of the voice, Julia was crying and apologized to the male staff. It seemed that she was being scolded for making mistakes in orders and behaving rudely to customers. We ate the delicious food while laughing at the sight of her, who had changed so much.
Mom.
It had been over 6 months since I'd last heard from my daughter, Violet, when her call came through. And it was past 8 p.m. It was rare for Violet, who had her own family, to call at such an hour unless it was daytime. I instinctively felt that something serious must have happened. Violet? What's going on? Calling at this hour? What happened? At first, Violet didn't respond. All I could hear from the other end of the phone was a quiet voice, as if air was leaking out.
Mom.
With a thin voice, as if squeezing it out, Violet finally spoke. Violet. What's wrong? Are you really okay?
Mom, help me.
Realizing it was an emergency, I hit the speaker button on the phone. Immediately, my husband Matthew rushed to my side, listening intently. Violet, pull yourself together. What happened?
It hurts. I haven't eaten anything. I might not make it.
Haven't eaten anything? What do you mean?
I haven't been given anything to eat by Florence and the others.
The image of Violet crawling on the floor, desperately reaching out to me for help, flashed through my mind.
That's too dangerous for you.
Matthew yelled, grabbing the car keys and heading to the door.
I'm coming to get you right now.
I shouted through the phone, hurrying after Matthew. My name is Sierra Smith. I'm 70 years old. Currently, Matthew and I run a steakhouse together. Matthew, having trained in famous restaurants when he was younger, is well regarded for his skills. Matthew and I met through a relative's introduction, and he opened his own restaurant when we got married. Not only is Matthew skilled in his craft, but his adept conversation skills and unpretentious personality have won over many regular customers. It's been nearly 30 years since I started helping out at the shop, but lately, I've begun to feel my body's decline. Perhaps due to age, I've started to feel pain in my back with just a little movement. Matthew has suggested hiring part-time help, but while grateful for his concern, I worry about labor costs and choose to work while I still can. Sometimes, Matthew jokes, it would have been nice to have her around at times like this, referring to our only daughter, Violet. Since she's already independent and has her own family, We can't ask her to come back home and help with the shop. Violet currently lives with her husband Albert, their son Kendrick, and her mother-in-law Florence in the next town over, about an hour's drive from our home. Recently, her sister-in-law Aurora joined them. I don't know the details, but I heard Aurora returned home after her divorce. I had hoped that Violet would help out at our shop after graduating from college, but Violet left home, saying she wanted to see more of the world. After that, she landed a job at a major department store, working in the ladies' clothing section. Though new to the workforce, Violet quickly won over customers with her charm and inherent cheerfulness. It was there she met her future husband, Albert Adams, who worked in the external sales department, dealing primarily with affluent clients purchasing luxury goods, and was considered a star in one of the company's most prestigious divisions. When Violet first introduced me to Albert, I felt a twinge of unease.
Are you sure it's okay to marry such a perfect man?
Indeed, Albert, with his handsome features and skillful conversation that appealed to women, had won over many customers, some of whom visited the store specifically to see him. Yet, Violet seemed unworried. "It's okay, Mom. Don't worry. I trust him." Subsequently, Violet married Albert, and upon doing so, left the department store to devote herself to supporting Albert as a housewife. The following year, the joy of having a grandson, Kendrick, allowed me to breathe a sigh of relief.
It seems, despite everything, those two are doing well.
For a while, the family of 3 lived in an apartment, but 5 years ago, following the death of the father-in-law, they moved to the elderly mother-in-law's house, thinking she would feel lonely by herself. Occasionally, Violet would call home, but she started to lament that Albert was often not around. "Albert stayed over at a colleague's apartment again last night because work was late. It's been happening a lot recently. Even on weekends, he's away for golfing with his college." Still, Violet laughed it off over the phone, suggesting it might just be the fate of a working adult. One day, I decided to call Violet after a long time. "Kendrick's birthday is coming up, right? Do you have any plans for the day?"
So far, we don't have anything planned for the daytime. What's up?
"Perfect. Our shop is closed that day, so how about the 3 of us go out somewhere? An amusement park or aquarium, somewhere that would make him happy."
That sounds nice. Recently, Albert's been so busy with work, he hardly comes home. Kendrick has been getting bored without being able to go out.
Violet sounded excited over the phone, but as Kendrick's birthday approached, she called me. "I'm sorry, Mom. I hate to say this, but some plans have come up since then. We can't go out with you after all. I'm really sorry."
"Plans? What happened?"
"A kids' club has organized a birthday party, so we can't make it that day."
"A kids' club, huh? I guess you can't just cancel on them."
Though disappointed, I switched gears. "Then it doesn't have to be Kendrick's birthday. Let us know whenever you're free." "I'm sorry, Mom. It doesn't look like we'll be able to go out for a while. Next week, there's a nature class at the kids' club, and the week after that, swimming lessons start. We're just too busy. Elementary school kids these days sure have it tough. It's disappointing, but it seems like giving up is the only option." I had been looking forward to seeing my granddaughter, so my disappointment was significant. I asked some of the parents who are regulars at our restaurant about what gaming consoles are popular with kids these days and sent one to Kendrick. "Mom, the gift arrived. Thank you." I received a thank you call from Violet. However, something about Violet's voice, which I should be familiar with, felt off to me. Maybe it's a mother's intuition, but Violet, usually bright and cheerful, sounded somehow dark and subdued this day. What's wrong? You sound tired today.
Not at all. I'm as energetic as ever.
Is that so? Well, if you say so.
Anyway, thanks for the gaming console.
About that. Since I'm not up to date with what elementary school kids like these days, I sent what was recommended to me. Did Kendrick really enjoy it?
Of course he did. He was really happy, saying, "Grandma knows best."
For some reason, Violet seemed in a hurry to end the call, as if she wanted to avoid prolonging our conversation. Are you guys doing okay?
Why the sudden concern? We're managing fine. So don't worry about us, Mom.
You've complained before about Albert coming home late. Has anything changed since then?
You worry too much. I told you not to mind it. Forget about that. Look, phone calls aren't free, you know, so I'm going to hang up now. You must be busy with the shop, too.
Just wait a minute. Right now, I'm more concerned about you than. But before I could finish, Violet had already hung up on me. Just by asking about her well-being, why does Violet seem to reject me this much? It's as if she doesn't want me to probe into her family's affairs, dodging my questions and cutting off the conversation unilaterally. I can't shake the feeling that something is not right. I felt a sense of foreboding. After the shop closes, it has become a routine for Matthew and me to have a quiet drink in the living room. That night, as usual, we relaxed, sharing the weariness of the day. It's about Violet. Something seems off. She seems tired, or maybe lacking energy. I can't quite put my finger on it.
Do you call her sometimes?
I just called her this afternoon, but she cut me off abruptly.
Is she keeping you at a distance?
More like she doesn't want to worry me. It might just be my mother's intuition, and I might be wrong, but I feel like Violet is hiding something from me. Matthew crossed his arms and fell silent for a moment before speculating.
Could it possibly be related to that?
To what? After hesitating, as if unsure whether to speak, Matthew seemed to make up his mind.
I heard something troubling from one of our regulars about Albert.
What happened with Albert?
The regular mentioned seeing him coming out of a pub with a woman, not Violet.
That can't be. Albert wouldn't do such a thing.
The woman apparently wasn't young, but was quite beautiful, dressed flamboyantly in what seemed like expensive brands.
It must be a case of mistaken identity. I said this seemingly in defense of Albert. Not so much to defend Albert, but more so because I didn't want to see a rift form between Violet and him, a sentiment more accurately described as parental concern.
Of course, the regular couldn't be sure it was Albert, just someone who looked somewhat like him.
I didn't want to believe this witness account at face value. Yet, I've heard that Albert has been coming home late and going out more on weekends lately. Could it be that he is seeing another woman behind Violet's back, unknown to us? Without any concrete information, my thoughts inevitably drift towards the worst. I'm worried about Violet. She never complains or shows weakness. If she knows about this and is suffering in silence.
Don't think too negatively. I'll see what I can do. For starters, we know a lawyer among our regulars. I'm thinking of consulting him.
Since then, concern for Violet has preoccupied me daily, to the point of accidentally dropping and breaking dishes. What's wrong? You seem tired yourself. I paused my work to call Violet multiple times, but she rarely answered. When she did, her updates were surprisingly brief, simply saying, "I'm fine." But whenever I tried to delve deeper into family matters, she'd laugh it off and hang up quickly. Each time I heard Violet's voice over the phone, it sounded weaker, as if it might fade away at any moment. Recalling Violet's charming, beloved smile before her marriage, I felt increasingly overwhelmed by my growing anxieties, leading to tears. Then, about half a year later, I received a sudden call from Violet, who had not contacted us for some time. And it was past 8 p.m. Such calls from Violet, now with her own family, were rare at this hour unless it was daytime. I instinctively felt that something serious must have happened. Violet? What's going on? Calling at this hour? What happened? Violet didn't respond. All I could hear from the other end of the phone was a quiet voice, as if air was leaking out. Despite holding the receiver, I was certain it was Violet. Is there anyone around you? Are you alone there? The lack of noisy chatter in the background led me to this conclusion.
Mom!
With a feeble voice, as if squeezing it out, Violet finally spoke. Violet. What's wrong? Are you really okay?
Mom, help me!
Sensing an emergency, I pressed the speakerphone button. Matthew quickly came to my side, listening intently. Violet, pull yourself together. Tell Mom what happened.
It hurts. I haven't eaten anything. I might not make it.
Haven't eaten anything? What do you mean?
I haven't been given anything to eat by Florence and the others.
The image of Violet crawling on the floor, desperately reaching out for my help, flashed through my mind.
Violet is in danger,
Matthew yelled, grabbing the car keys and heading towards the entrance.
I'm coming to get you right now,
I shouted through the phone, quickly following Matthew. During the drive, we were silent the entire time. Matthew kept his mouth shut, gripping the steering wheel, his brows furrowed, veins standing out on his forehead. There was an indescribable anxiety and anger at the possibility that our precious Violet was being subjected to injustice. If I looked in the mirror, I'm sure I would see the same expression on my face as on Matthew's. Holding back the tears, I closed my eyes and saw Violet's innocent, youthful smile. The image of a pure, innocent girl reaching out to Matthew and me with her tiny hands, trying to share happiness, filled me with frustration. Violet was asking for help. Thinking this made us feel incredibly ashamed for not noticing her suffering sooner. Even without seeing her directly, it was clear from her voice on the phone that Violet was severely weakened. I couldn't believe that Violet, who always had a vibrant smile, was now in such a state, calling for help. Looking out the passenger window at the dark town, I thought,
this must be a dream, a bad dream.
Passing through a quiet residential area, the light leaking from each home seemed to carry the laughter of families, reminding me of what Violet in our life should be, which brought more sadness. The journey that usually takes an hour during the day was quicker due to the lack of rush hour traffic, and we soon arrived at the Adams house. Are you okay? If you want, I can go in alone. Matthew spoke kindly, showing concern for me, but this was a problem for our family to face. Preparing for whatever reality awaited us, I resolved. We will definitely save Violet with our own hands. When I rang the doorbell, a carefree voice responded after a pause. Hello? Who is it at this hour? Contrary to the urgent call from Violet, Albert's relaxed and peaceful voice left us puzzled.
It's Smith, Violet's mother.
Upon hearing my name, Albert fell silent, possibly on guard, then slowly asked,
Is there something wrong?
He then cracked the door open slightly, peering out at us standing outside.
I'm sorry for bothering you late at night, Albert. It's urgent, and we need to talk.
Matthew wedged his foot into the slight opening of the door and forcefully pushed it open.
What are you doing, Matthew? We're coming in.
We barged in with a determined attitude, not taking no for an answer. Standing in front of a dimly lit, narrow room at the end of the hallway.
Is Violet in here?
There's no explaining why we thought Violet was in this room, but we instinctively knew she was here, calling out to us for help.
This is outrageous. Even if you are Violet's parents, I'll call the police. Good. That way, the police can witness this too.
Without hesitation, Matthew forcefully slid open the room's door. There, Violet was curled up on the floor, resembling a worn and discarded mop. It took a few seconds for my brain to recognize that it was indeed Violet, so emaciated and altered was her appearance.
Violet! Oh, what has happened to you?
We rushed to Violet, lifting her weakened body in our arms.
Mom, help me! I'm in pain. I can't take it anymore.
Barely speaking between erratic breaths, that's how Violet responded. It was immediately clear that Violet was delirious and suffering from dehydration.
What are you doing here? Leave immediately.
Albert tried to dismiss us as if we were intruders, but his voice lacked any conviction. His gaze wandered as if frightened, and his body trembled.
Albert! Bring some water now! I can't possibly. Don't argue, just do it.
Pressured by my stern shout, Albert ran to the kitchen and quickly returned with a bottle of water from the fridge. I snatched the bottle, opened it. Here, Violet. Drink some water. Alerted by the commotion, Florence and Aurora also appeared.
What is all this noise about? It's so loud I can't hear the TV. We're the ones who need an explanation here.
As Matthew glared at Albert, Albert began to apologize profusely.
I'm so sorry.
Albert then started to explain how Violet ended up in this state, a story beyond our wildest imaginations. It seemed that initially, Violet and Albert had managed well living with Florence. However, at some point, Albert started coming home late, and in response, Florence's attitude towards Violet turned cold. One day, when Violet felt anxious about Albert's late returns, she sought advice from Florence. Instead of addressing her concerns, Florence blamed Violet for Albert's absence. Violet couldn't understand why she was being blamed.
It's because you haven't returned to your pre-pregnancy figure,
Florence told her. Following that, Florence began imposing all household chores on Violet and even restricted her meals. Despite this, Violet remained upbeat, brushing off the unreasonable demands, but it seemed Florence found no amusement in her resilience. The harassment escalated, and under the guise of preventing secret snacking, Florence took control of all Violet's finances. Seeing an opportunity for entertainment, Aurora, the recently divorced sister-in-law, joined in, with Florence assigning her to monitor Violet whenever Florence was away. The hardest part for Violet was being denied the opportunity to care for Kendrick herself. Despite living under the same roof, there was nothing more painful and sad than not being able to raise her own child. Florence forbade Violet from seeing Kendrick and had Aurora stop her whenever she tried to approach his room. While Violet was punished with cleaning duties, Florence spent joyful moments with Kendrick. "This is all I know," Albert said, collapsing to his knees, powerless.
Don't speak of our family's shame so lightly. How could you discuss such trivial matters with strangers?
Albert, you've become so weak.
That's not all, is it? There's more you're hiding, right?
Albert looked up, his face flashing with panic. Just then, a taxi stopped at the entrance and someone alighted.
They've arrived.
The Addams family was confused, unable to grasp the situation. Soon, a slender gentleman in his 50s appeared, causing Albert's face to turn pale.
It seems you recognize this gentleman, don't you?
Albert didn't answer, realizing he was in a situation with no escape. He waited silently, letting time pass.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Watson. I believe this is the first time I've had the pleasure of meeting the Addams family in person.
Kevin Watson introduced himself, looking at each member of the Addams family in turn. In his youth, Kevin Watson was a popular actor known to everyone, starring in movies and dramas. As he aged, his popularity waned, leaving only his name known to the public.
Why is Mr. Kevin Watson at our home?
Florence, representing the Addams family, asked, her smile strained and her voice high-pitched with clear agitation. It was clear to anyone that she was visibly shaken.
It was I who invited Mr. Watson here. Before coming, I contacted a lawyer acquaintance and asked Mr. Watson to join us as well. And what exactly is the relationship between Mr. Watson and us?
Florence attempted to feign ignorance, but I smirked and said,
Don't pretend you don't know anything. You must have some idea why Mr. Watson is here.
The lawyer arrived shortly after, apologizing for his delay.
Sorry for being late. I was organizing some documents for another case, and it took longer than expected.
The arrival of the lawyer silenced the Addams family.
In fact, at Sierra's request, I've been investigating Albert's personal life for the past 6 months. It turns out, Albert has been frequently meeting a certain woman, a wealthy client at the department store where Albert works. And upon investigating this woman, we uncovered a shocking truth. That woman happens to be my wife, Hillary Sanders.
Kevin Watson added in a calm tone to the lawyer's explanation.
When my wife brought up divorce, I was initially surprised, but deep down, I felt, of course. She had been going out secretly for a while. After hearing the details from this lawyer, everything made sense. So, we decided to come here to hear directly from Mr. Albert, the party involved.
Albert slowly stood up, and in a frail voice, as if devoid of spirit, began to tell everything.
My relationship with Hillary started, as mentioned earlier, through her being a major client at the department store and me being the attendant. Over the years of working visits to her home, we developed a relationship. Initially, it was just a fling for me, but then it was revealed Hillary was pregnant, and we realized we couldn't turn back. We discussed leaving our partners to remarry. I'm truly sorry.
At Kevin Watson's feet, filled with indignation, Albert collapsed powerlessly.
When I was a celebrated actor, adored by the public, Hillary would always greet me with her brightest smile. But now that my work has dwindled, meeting a handsome man like you must have been irresistible for her. She's the type who must have everything she likes.
Kevin Watson said with a weary smile. Albert, who wanted a divorce from Violet, was in a bind because filing for divorce while having an affair would lead to a hefty compensation claim against him. So, he turned to Florence for help. Initially, Florence resisted the idea of divorce due to how it would look but changed her tune completely upon learning the other woman was wealthy. Thinking there would be no need to pay compensation if Violet, the daughter-in-law, initiated the divorce, Florence began to torment her relentlessly, hoping to drive her out of the house.
I believed you, but you...
Violet, staggering yet standing firm on her feet, expressed her frustration loudly, tears streaming down her face.
I believed that if I lost weight, Albert would return to me. That's why I endured all the unreasonable demands from Florence and Aurora. To think it was all a scheme to drive me out.
It's okay. You've done nothing wrong. You don't have to push yourself anymore. I embraced Violet tightly.
I did want to divorce Violet, that's true. But I never imagined Mom and Aurora could be this cruel to her.
I'm utterly disillusioned.
Wait just a minute. I was only trying to help you by getting Violet out of this house. It's your fault for having an affair in the first place.
That's right. Albert, you've been silently condoning what we've been doing.
Don't act like you were oblivious to it all now.
As the three of them argued, I was speechless, but Violet, trembling with anger, shouted,
Enough! If you so desperately wanted me out of here, I'll leave on my own.
Oh, that would be a relief.
You're mistaken to be pleased, Florence. I will never forgive you. Once we're divorced, I will indeed demand a substantial amount in compensation, just so you know.
With that, Violet called out with a voice that echoed through the house.
Kendrick! Where are you? Come here, we're going to live with Mom and Grandpa and Grandma from now on.
Okay, coming. Kendrick cheerfully ran down the stairs and hugged Violet. Subsequently, Albert, exposed for his affair with a client, was dismissed from his company for severely damaging the corporate image. Following her declaration, Violet filed for divorce and sued Albert for a significant amount in compensation. After losing his job and being ordered to pay compensation for the divorce, Albert, following a major argument with Florence and Aurora, was forced to reluctantly sell the house. Violet's anger did not subside with this. She also demanded substantial compensation from Florence and Aurora for the mental and physical distress they caused her. Despite the harassment from Florence and Aurora, Violet had meticulously documented the daily events in a notebook, which proved advantageous in court. Returning to her parents' home, Violet gradually healed both mentally and physically, reverting to her cheerful self. There were ongoing issues with the Addams family, but with the help of a skilled lawyer, everything was resolved. I heard through the grapevine that Albert and Hillary had a child. After losing his job and the house, Albert, supported by Hillary's wealth but devoid of the will to work, grew increasingly unkempt. Moreover, with the elderly Florence and the nagging Aurora joining them, Hillary, raised in luxury, could not stand it and eventually left with the child. What became of the Addams family after Hillary left is neither within my knowledge nor my interest.
Well, I've slacked off enough. Time to get to work.
With renewed determination, Violet started helping out at the store, taking over for me as I struggled with back pain. Having worked in customer service at a major department store, Violet's reputation quickly made our shop a local sensation, drawing long lines of customers. With our new promotional model in place, I have no regrets. I stepped back from the storefront, spending my free time watching over Kendrick as much as possible. Kendrick, soon to be a middle schooler, declared at his elementary school graduation, "I want to be a cool chef like Grandpa." His proclamation brought Matthew and me to tears. We are now eagerly looking forward to his future.